Welcome to Lesson 3 in the Getting Started series of A Disciple's Guide to Read the Bible. In Lesson 3, we're going to start discussing what it means to read the passage in context. And we're going to be on page 5 in the workbook. Again, hopefully you've downloaded that and you can follow along. So if you want to turn to page 5, as we consider reading the passage in context. Last lesson, we discussed discipleship application, and that's our goal whenever we read the Bible. And so now that we know what the goal is, now we can start laying the foundation of how we get there. And the foundation is really reading the passage in context. And let me use a simple example to explain the importance of context for understanding language, really, not just the Bible. So let's take the simple question, how are you? And let's consider just a few different contexts that you may ask this question or get asked this question. So, for example, let's say it's just a casual greeting while you walk past someone. You're, hey, how are you? Okay, in that context, honestly, you're probably not really wanting to know how they're doing in life. It's more of a way of being polite in that particular context, especially in our culture. Or maybe now consider that same phrase, how are you, from a doctor who walks in to check on a patient after surgery. In that instance, the doctor is really concerned with how the patient is doing, but their concern is going to be very specific to their physical health and how they're recovering from surgery. And whatever the surgery was, they want to know how are they doing with respect to that. So it's a very specific question in that context. Or imagine you come home and you realize your spouse has had a rough day, and it's more, hey, how are you? There's legitimate concern. So there's not a physical concern. It's not just a polite greeting. No, you really want to know how they are doing. What is it that may, have them in, just kind of a down mood, or just whatever it is. You're concerned about your spouse in that context. Or you go up to check on your child after telling them to clean the room. Well, hey, how are you? How are things going up here? Well, you're looking for a status report. You're not concerned about their physical condition or, their overall well-being. You want to know if they're doing what's being asked of you. So those different contexts can hopefully explain why it's important that we understand the context of the Bible whenever we read a particular passage. And so the entire read method will really cover 4 contexts that are important, but in this lesson, we're just going to consider the first 2. The first one is the immediate or the local context. And what I mean by that is it's simply the information that is before or after a particular passage that you're reading. This is the easiest to obtain because, well, it's right there in front of you. All you have to do is read the passage that comes before and after the text you're considering, and you can see what the immediate and the local context is. And what we're going to do is an example to help you understand why the immediate context is important. Well-known verse that many people may have memorized, but that people, or maybe you've heard this particular verse. It's Philippians 4:13, and Paul says, "I can do all things through Him," meaning Christ. "I can do all things through Him who strengthens me." Now, I want you to, just for a second, imagine you don't know anything else about the Bible, okay? And I want you to think about, what could this possibly mean? I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. And if you want, you can pause the video and think about it. And as you think about it, I want you to use your imagination. And if you're discussing this in a group, don't show off your biblical knowledge at the beginning. As a group, spend some time using your imagination what in the world could this possibly mean? If you don't know the context, if you don't know anything else about what Paul is writing, I can do all things through him who strengthens me. Well, if you use your imagination, you could say, well, I can become a multi-billionaire through Christ who strengthens me, right? Because, I mean, Paul says all things, and you can even use, the little preacher's trick. Well, all means all, so I can do all things. I can be a multi-billionaire through Christ. Or I can be the best at sports. Every time I'm going to go play a game and I'm going to claim this verse, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. And the all that I'm going to claim this for is to go win this basketball game. You just better hope that somebody else on the other team isn't claiming this verse as well, if that's how you try to apply it. Or, if you really want to get imaginative, well, I can fly. I'm going to jump off a building. I can fly because Jesus will give me the strength to fly because, well, all things. Okay, well, obviously, those are kind of ridiculous. Hopefully you realize that that's not what Paul means in that passage. And so let's read the context of the passage just by looking at what comes right before it. Paul says this beginning in verse 10. I rejoiced in the Lord greatly. Now at length you have revived your concern for me. You were indeed concerned for me, but you had no opportunity. Not that I am speaking of being in need, for I have learned in whatever situation I am to be content. I know how to be brought low, and I know how to abound. In any and every circumstance, I have learned the secret of facing plenty and hunger, abundance and need. I can do all things through him who strengthens me. Now, I want you to discuss what would you say this passage means. Well, it doesn't mean we can do anything that we can imagine. No, what Paul is saying here is that we can face any and every circumstance in life, whether it's good circumstances or bad circumstances. We can face those with contentment because Jesus Christ will give us strength. That's the all things that Paul means. It's all circumstances in life. We can face those. We can be content in those through Christ. Another context I want us to consider in this lesson is the historical and the cultural context. And this focuses on historical events, settings, circumstances, cultural norms of a particular passage. And now this one is, maybe a little bit harder to obtain than the immediate context. Sometimes the Bible will tell you hints about what's going on in the culture and or maybe some of the historical notes. But sometimes you need extra resources to help you pick up on these things. And one helpful resource would be a study Bible. Study Bible I use is the ESV Study Bible. Most study Bibles you find are going to be thicker than your normal Bible because they have additional notes added to the biblical text. Or you can use things like a Bible dictionary or commentary or similar resources like that to help you understand the historical, cultural context. So let's look at another example. Consider John 13 when Jesus washes his disciples' feet. He says this. After he washes their feet, he says, "If I then, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also ought to wash one another's feet. For I have given you an example that you also should do just as I have done to you." Now again, let's assume you don't know anything about the culture. You don't know anything about the Bible. And I want you to pause the video and I want you to think, what could Jesus mean here? Especially when he says, I've given you an example that now you should do just as I've done to you. So again, think about that. Use your imagination. And discuss that with your group and then come back. All right, now, whatever you came up with, it doesn't really take much imagination. You would look at it and say, well, it means we must literally wash each other's feet. He washed their feet. He said, I've given you an example. Now you go do what I've done. And so, okay, let's go wash people's feet. But what if I tell you that the cultural context is, people didn't have vehicles. People walked most of the places they went, so their feet were dirty. Their feet were filthy and stinky and calloused. And, so you know, even today, we probably don't want to wash people's feet. But back then, this was very much a role of a servant, but just because of how dirty and filthy their feet would have been. And so, what Jesus is doing here is he's taking on the role of a servant. Even though he's their Lord, he is our Lord, he is coming to serve his disciples by washing their feet. And so, with that in mind, with just knowing that little bit of the cultural context, I want you to now think about, okay, what does this mean? How does this change our understanding? And hopefully, what you realize is that what Jesus is saying here is the life of a disciple is the life of a servant. That we shouldn't view anybody below us. That we shouldn't view any way of serving someone as below us. That Jesus took on the form of a servant and washed his disciples' feet. Now, we may literally wash somebody's feet as a way as to show that we are serving them. That could certainly happen. But Jesus's meaning here, what he's teaching us, goes beyond just washing feet. It's a much deeper, broader meaning to our life as a disciple. Okay, so what I want you to do is, for some practice, is these two passages that we've used to show the importance of reading the passage in context. Is I want you to spend some time now thinking about, okay, how does this apply? How do these passages apply to my life as a disciple? Because as you think about that, that's going to help you with the discipleship application goal. So hopefully this is helpful as we continue learning the read process, and I look forward to our next lesson. Hey, I finished recording and realized I forgot to help prepare you for the next lesson. So at the end of the lesson that we just covered there on page 6, there's some practice that involves practicing applying the two passages that we looked at here in lesson 3. But lesson 4 is actually going to be reviewing practice passages. And these are going to be more involved. So if you look on page 7, there's 3 different passages. You should probably spend a day on each one. These are going to be more involved. They're self-guided. So as long as you're aware that you can look at those, work through those passages before the next lesson, that way you will be prepared as I walk through and review the practice problems. And these hopefully will help you see the importance of reading passages in context, and then also start helping you think through how you apply these passages to help you grow as a follower of Jesus. So hopefully that clarifies things and helps get you ready for lesson 4.